And it's just really a very special day for many of us. Today we're celebrating the founding of the Triratna Movement and Order. And in my meditation this morning, I was leading the guided one, so here's a confession. I worked out that it's 55 years old today. So, well, I don't know that exactly today, but early April, 55 years ago, Sangharakshita, our founder, founded the movement, and a couple of years later he founded the order. But of course we celebrate the two things together now. So this morning, rather than the usual format, which is to have a talk and then go into breakout groups, and the Zoom people have their own breakout groups, we're just going to have 3 talks and then we'll stay all together. But we're very happy to have any sorts of questions or responses. You know, if you just want to say what coming to the centre's meant to you or whatever, you know, that would be fine. And I think we'll ask for the questions to come at the end. Yeah, so we'll go in the order of Kellie, who's sitting in the middle here, who is a mitra who's training for ordination, Jinavajra, who's a fairly young order member in order years. Yeah, 2 or 3 years old, and I'm very old in biological and in order years. And I'll go last. So I'll hand over to Kellie. Thanks so much, Kellie.
Thank you, Nagasuri. Happy Triratna Day, everybody. It's a delight to be here. I'm generally on Zoom with my fellow Zoomers, so it's a real pleasure to actually physically be here with you on this special day. As Nagasuri said, I'm what's known as a mitra going for refuge, training for ordination, and that's so more commonly called a GFR mitra for short. You may have heard that mentioned. So when I began to think about this talk, what sort of inspired me when I think about this Triratna order, there was a particular image that kept coming up for me over and over again, and it is this beautiful image. I'll just hold it up to show you. And this image is a rupa of the form of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara.
And just, yeah.
Zoom, thank you. Okay. Avalokiteshvara is a form of a Bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is a figure or a representation or a guide of what we can become, our perfected human consciousness, really our potentiality. Avalokiteshvara is a mythic image and has 11 heads and 1,000 arms. And each of these 1,000 arms extending out in all directions holds a unique implement, an offering to all beings, as an aid to meet their pain and suffering in the world. And Avalokiteshvara, importantly, is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And I could give an entire talk on Avalokiteshvara, probably a series of talks, but just for the sake of brevity this morning, I'll give you a quick rundown of how Avalokiteshvara came into being. Avalokiteshvara made a vow that he would deliver all of the people of Tibet from their suffering, and then help them gain enlightenment. And he made a vow that if he should hesitate in this vow, he would split into 1,000 pieces. And one day he entered into a very, very deep meditation on compassion. And when he arose from this meditation, hoping that he had led all beings from enlightenment, he found that there were people still suffering in the world. And he became incredibly dispirited, and momentarily he thought about giving up his vow. And in that moment of hesitation, he split and shattered into many, many pieces. And in agony, he called out to the Red Buddha, Amitabha, who is represented right behind me. And Amitabha came to Avalokiteshvara's aid and gathered all of these shattered pieces and put him back together, but this time in a different form with 1,000 arms, each arm reaching out into the world to meet the suffering of the human condition and all sentient beings, and then also created 10 heads. And then Amitabha placed his head on top of the 10th head, making the 11th head. So then Avalokiteshvara was then able to continue dispelling suffering from the world far more effectively than before with these 1,000 arms reaching out to meet all suffering. And the Triratna Buddhist Order, Bhante Sangharakshita, our teacher and founder of the order, has decided that as the order began to grow, this mythic figure of Avalokiteshvara meeting the suffering and reaching out into the world was an apt symbol for the order as it continued to grow. Symbolically, the order represents an individual arm, each order member reaching out into the world. And each arm and each order member with their unique abilities offering an implement, offering something out into the world. And each one coming together, connected to the body of Avalokiteshvara, which is the embodiment of compassion. Now, many years later, in 2014, there's another image that I also find deeply inspiring. It is the symbol of Avalokiteshvara, but this time it was put together as in the form of a mosaic, something that's really interesting to have a look close up. And each one of these little mosaic figures is the face of an actual order member. Now, back in 2014, there was around just over 1,800 order members, but I believe as of 2022, we're looking at around 3,000 now. So you can imagine these faces extending far greater out into the world to around 30 countries around the world.
I'll just take it forward.
Thank you. And I find what this image symbolises deeply inspiring. Each one of these order members, as a being who've dedicated their lives to the ideal of going for refuge to the three jewels of Buddhism, to the Buddha, the ideal of human enlightenment, to the Dharma, the path to enlightenment, and to the Sangha, the spiritual community that practice the Dharma. And each one of these inspiring beings, these order members, have made the commitment to place this going for refuge at the central point of their lives. And I find that deeply, deeply inspiring and something that I aspire to. They've chosen to make the Triratna Buddhist Order the context in which they're trying to live more deeply, imbued with wisdom and compassion. The body of Avalokiteshvara represents the order as a free association of individuals working towards a common goal, a spiritual community of people who've pledged themselves to following the Buddha's path to enlightenment. And whether we're just starting out on the spiritual path or fully ordained for a few years or many, many years, so many of us find ourselves generally wanting to help the world, to have that altruistic feeling. And Avalokiteshvara and the Triratna Order symbolises that we should not hold back in acting to help others. We don't exist in isolation from each other, and the Triratna Order represents to me an aspiring spiritual community who are perfuming the world with a higher beauty. Sangharakshita, our founder, said, "We call it an order because it seeks to create a reservoir of spiritual energy on which we may all draw and from which all may benefit." And I can say that I am deeply grateful to all of the Triratna Order members, especially those who give so freely of themselves each week here and whom we call our friends. I'm deeply grateful for the respect and the reservoir of spiritual energy that is the Triratna lineage, and which gently holds each one of us in this spiritual community, regardless of where we are on this spiritual path. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kellie. I don't know how you're feeling, Jinavajra, but I mean, it's wonderful to be reminded of that, but my goodness, yeah, quite a challenge. Over to you, Jinavajra.
Thank you, Kellie. That's really good. Yeah, that's put a lot of good things in context. One of the things you mentioned was us all being individuals within the greater body of movement towards trying to be kind and helpful to the world. And so my take on the things which have come up for me as I've reflected on why I why I love Triratna and why I'm an order member and why I've gone to all the training and everything, will be from my viewpoint, from where I've come from in my life, and where I would like to develop to. I'll start, just make a note at a time. So I've been here for 14 years. 14 years ago, I came into the centre to learn to meditate. And I just reflect back at how amazing that is, that I just Googled meditation, and this happened to be very close to where I lived. It was that I sort of, you just take these things for granted, don't you? Things are just there for you. But, and I reflect on it, and you reflect that it's in Newtown, which is a very sort of, open-minded sort of place where people have always embraced new ideas. It reflects Newtown, and it will also have affected Newtown with its inclusivity. Men and women are seen as very equal partners in this project. There's no, the idea of men taking the lead all the time isn't the case here, and also for gender fluidity and just a general inclusivity and trying to be kind and helpful to people and help them develop. And one of the first things which struck me when I first came here and learned to meditate was how modern Buddhism seems, like the ideas behind it. And this, I think, is very much part of how Triratna's gift to us has been. That it fits with a Western context, but the Western context just brings alive how dynamic and modern it is, how we're all so intimately connected. Everything we do will have an effect on everything else, and everything we are is a result of all these conditions which have been put upon us in this universe. And this just sits perfectly with how a lot of our secular scientific minds, which I was certainly like that before I became a Buddhist, it just sort of flowed and worked with that very well. But it also challenges that and has opened up my mind to new ways of understanding the universe. So as I said, it's a very inclusive place. This a non-controlling. We don't try and control people. There are I don't know if you call them rules, but there are traditions which we have, which we are there, we believe, to help us understand and integrate better into the universe, or the world, or our society we live in, and to be helpful. But one of the things is that we're not monks. We're order members, but we're not monks. We're very integrated into society. Monks are separated and very much put on a pedestal. I don't think you should be putting us on a pedestal with human beings like the rest of you. We're just trying to develop ourselves. So it's important, I have a job when I go to work every day. I work, since I've become an order member, I've dialed it back and become freelance, so maybe 8 months a year. But I still go into a workplace, I go into the greater society, and I try, as part of my practice is to go into the greater society with my work, and try and be a good example, and try and be friendly to people. If I say something harsh, I reflect on it, I will try to sort of address it with the person who I was maybe harsh to, and apologise and say, not what my intention was. That's not how how my ideal of operating would be. And I think that's so important. I don't think I could become a monk. I don't think that would work. we're all human beings, and monks are human beings, and you'd probably be surprised by their behaviour if you met some monks and hung out with them. Yeah, I don't think it's really useful. I think it's more useful that I'm out there trying to connect with people and just be helpful. With this, one of the expressions we use is, are our actions skillful or unskillful? And this is something you should be asking yourself all the time. Is what I'm doing, is that beneficial to this situation? We can never, that's a wise thing to be able to handle that, but does this feel good? What I am now trying to sort of suggest to the rest of, to my people who I'm dealing with at this particular moment in time. And that's something, so we, in Buddhism and in Triratna, we use that term, skillful or unskillful actions. Are the actions we're doing skillful? Are we good, beneficial to society? Is it going to help society blossom into a kinder place? So these are other things, although I can see the clock ticking down on me. But one thing which I love, because I trained as an artist, so I did a fine art degree when I was a young man, and I consider myself fundamentally to be an artist. And one of the things which Triratna certainly encourages is artistic development and appreciation of the arts. This also ties in very much with Buddhist things of being very attentive to things and seeing the subtlety in everything around us. Everything is so unique and beautiful and perfectly almost crafted into the world. Everything is perfect. We're all perfect, even when we're terrible. It's sort of we are in a way. I mean, we can't. We've developed. We flowed open with the universe. Things have conditioned us into how to be, like a flower or a bird, and we do things which can trouble us, but we've got to be kind to ourselves and not beat ourselves up about this. But the point is, I think I'm trying to make, is that this lends to a very creative idea of how things are working. Everything is so connected to each other. And as an artist, you're always looking for these connections as well and trying to build on things and bring beauty out in things. And one of the things you should develop as you meditate more and you consider and reflect on things is that things you do have more appreciation of how fundamentally beautiful things are, even things which might seem on the face of it to be rather ugly, can seem beautiful. I mean, everything we see around us has enabled us to come into existence, and we've enabled it to come into existence. So there's a gratitude which you need to have, and this is something which is also very much encouraged us to try and find gratitude within our surroundings and the things which have enabled us to be here, and try and find some kind of gratitude, and with the gratitude, there's a kindness and a respect for these things. And yeah, sorry, I could come through. I realise the time is up.
Don't worry, you're doing beautifully. You carry on.
But this, I feel, the artistic side, I feel, the Dharma, which is the way the Buddha's teaching, is a very creative process. And the way we all talk about it, when we converse, and everybody here will talk about it together. And it's a creation. It's like artists talking to each other, which I like, because I naturally respond to artistic talking. And I feel like we're all the whole of the Sangha. The Sangha is the people who follow the Buddha. And talking to us, we all talk in very artistic ways or very creatively. We try and use our imagination to make an idea open up, as opposed to closing down. So we don't allow things to close down. It's all, creativity is about opening up and taking parts and making them work. So that's what we're doing here at Sydney Buddhist Centre. We're trying to make things work so that they're more beneficial to society. And there's a lot of imagination and creativity involved in that. And this is one thing which we're very big on here, which is to try and encourage this kind of mentality. So I think that's fantastic. And Sangharakshita, who set up this movement, he's very much helped create and craft and use his imagination to make this framework. And now we're, as order members, he's died now, but we as order members are trying to carry on this tradition, carry on the tradition of the Dharma, and keep it alive and try and allow society to become kinder. I think it's, I'm English, and I've always loved the Beatles and stuff like that. And the gift they've given to the world, and expressing love and understanding of suffering and joy. And I feel like this movement is like that. It's on that level. I think as the time goes by, these things will flower up, and we'll see how important these more inclusive, interconnected, vast ideas which Buddhism is will help society get out of its more straitjacketed view of how we've all come to be here and what we're supposed to be doing. That's it.
Thank you, Jinavajra. And I love that thought of the Sangha as being creative. And of course, you're right, the interconnectedness and just that joy of trying to speak as openly and listen as attentively as possible. I'm somebody who would previously have said I couldn't paint my way out of a paper bag, and I don't say that anymore, except to say what a foolish woman I was before. But Sangharakshita, talked about you can be creative about your life, and when he said that, I sort of thought, yes, of course, and it's really the most important thing to be creative about. So for some of us who perhaps don't have the further and deeper creative impulses and skills, there's that which meant a lot to me. So in many ways, my talk overlaps a great deal with Jinavajra's, but I'll keep an eye on the time. As I said, 8 minutes. I better see how I go myself. Thank you. Yes, turn around. Great. So in the late 80s, my 18-year marriage fell apart, not of my initiating. I don't want to say I didn't have responsibilities there, but it wasn't of my initiating. And I went looking for stress management. I didn't want to go down the allopathic route of sleeping tablets and things like that. And I asked a friend of mine, I worked at Macquarie University, whether I knew he was a meditator. I didn't realise he was a Buddhist, but I knew he was a meditator. And I asked, did he know somewhere that taught meditation? And he sort of said, oh yes. And he introduced me to what was then the Western Buddhist Order and the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. That was the initial name that we had. And you would have joined us at a time when we were still FWBO, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. I can't remember when it changed over to Triratna, but it was somewhere in the 2000s. About 2008 or 9, I think, but don't hold me on that. I was a historian out at Macquarie, but that's another lifetime. And so I went to meditation, and I went to a course that was led by Dharmananda, whom some of you may know. He's still here in Australia. He's an Englishman, but he came to Australia and he now lives up on the Central Coast, and he still comes in. Sometimes he'll give a talk on Saturday mornings. And Ratna Jyoti, who leads the Bodhi Books and Gifts, and he was then John, so a long time ago, 89 to be precise. And so I went to the course that they offered in meditation, and, I sort of thought, Dhyana and things like that, the angels would, there mightn't be angels, but these glorious figures would be there, and there'd be, trumpets and everything else. And so I sort of came up with another fixed view, and that was that I was not a meditator. But I just found the Sangha so attractive and so welcoming. And something was happening on the meditation level, but of course not at that level of what I thought what it should be. So when the course was over and I was allowed to join women's study, and they were at that stage looking at the tantric path, which for those of you who know anything about Buddhism will know, it's the Vajrayana. It's very complex, it's very culturally bound, but that was the only women's group I could join. And so they let me join, and I was very grateful to that. And, I just think I swam along without sort of recognizing. I didn't drown, but I swam along sort of, taking deep gulps of breath probably. But I did enjoy the single-sex nature of activities. I mean, the course had been mixed and had been led by 2 men, and that was fine. I did teach women's studies out at Macquarie University, so there was a strong feminist bit in me, and I really enjoyed the fact that here at Triratna things were done in single sex, in study groups, and then if you become a mitra, etc., and training for ordination. And I think for me, the thing that I had that strong sense of homecoming, and it's partly the rupa, and it is this rupa here. Sorry, rupa just means statue. This Buddha statue here. But I think it was very much the friendliness and the welcome, and then Sangharakshita's interpretation and translation of the Dharma. So I got to a puja quite early on. I went looking for stress management. I had my feet firmly in cement, and I just, I recognised I was very stressed, and etc. And it was the 5 precepts that, of course, are chanted in their negative formulation and their positive formulation in puja, which is just a devotional activity that really just went straight to my heart, absolutely deeply. The negative formulation of the second precept is, I undertake to abstain from not taking the not given. And, for me, that's so much more than I undertake not to steal. And so, because, as first world people, I feel very strongly about the environment and about the resources that we use and things like that. So that spoke to me strongly. And then in the positive formulations, stillness, simplicity, and contentment. And many years later, so I asked quite quickly to become a mitra, and that took time then, and it took me, I was ordained in 2000, so 11 years later, I was deemed ready to be ordained. And I was in Nagpur. I worked in India with the Indian wing of the movement and order for a number of years, and I was in Nagpur about 2006, again the date is hazy, and it was a big international Buddhist convention. The Dalai Lama was there, all sorts of people were there, and every morning the refuges and precepts were chanted in Hindi, another Asian language, and I can't remember what, and in the positive formulations, and in Pali, and then the positive formulations were chanted in English. And at least 2 people, not from Triratna, came and said, what are these positive formulations? Has your founder made them up? And definitely not. But it's so interesting that in all the Buddhist groups that I know about, and that's not very many, it's only the negative formulation that is chanted. And the positive one, of course, is limitless, with deeds of loving kindness, with open-handed generosity, with stillness, simplicity, and contentment. I purify my body. And so it was lovely to be able to talk to people and say they are deeply canonical. They're there, they're seen as the skillful dharmas, the unskillful dharmas, the things you shouldn't do are harm people and take the not given and sexually conduct yourself and things like that. So that was very, very important to me. I think that was the golden light got me at that point, and that's when I asked to become a mitra, etc. And the fact that there was a strong link with India was really important. I'd done my BA honours thesis in Indian history and had all, when I was a Christian, thought I would become a missionary in India. That died long before I became a Buddhist, but that gives you a sense of my connection there. And then there's also Bante's written and spoken commentaries on the Pali Canon, on the early sutras, and then on the much later sutras. And the way he can tease them out and see inner meanings and inner connections and things like that is something I have always deeply appreciated and just recognised, without Bante's wisdom and knowledge as well, the Dharma wouldn't have become so alive for me. And then, of course, for me as a feminist, the fact that women ordained women, and that didn't happen immediately, of course, to begin with. I mean, Bante ordained women from the very beginning, the very first ordination ceremony, there were women involved. But he ordained women until there were enough ordained women that they could themselves take on that really big responsibility, spiritual responsibility. So by the time I came along and was ordained, I was privately ordained by a woman and publicly ordained by a woman. And they take on all levels of responsibility. So there've been women at the head of the College of Public Preceptors, which is, spiritually the most important group. They're the ones who maintain as much as they can the harmony within the order and the inviting new people to join the order. And then, like Jinavajra, I just love the openness of Triratna, the fact that all people can come, they can become mitras, they can become ordained, and that for me I feel is it's the heart of the Dharma, it really is. But unfortunately, as the Dharma has become locked into particular religious organisations, many of them have been very less open to women, certainly very much less open to people of diverse gender and sexualities. And I very much appreciate the fact that here all people are included. And the one that we're struggling with at the moment is non-binary, because the training for ordination process has been very much single sex. So people who are non-binary at the moment still have to make a choice where they'll do that training. And they certainly can join, but we're having to work on that one, and these things don't happen quickly. So, yeah. So just to come back to myself, partly, of course, it's the Dharma, but it is also Triratna in the way it has offered the Dharma to the world. So it's very much Bante and Triratna and the beauty of the Dharma. But for me, it's given my life meaning. I was in my mid-40s when I first found it, and a clarity and a direction, and the values, or very much the values that I had been brought up with and that I had, but having lost any sense of connection with Christianity, it was really a bit adrift, not that I felt myself adrift. I think I was very complacent. I had good health and etc., etc. All the things that samsara thought were a good idea, I seem to have. But as that fell apart, then things did. So I'm enormously grateful for that. And I'd just love to come back to the image that you used, Kelly, of the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara, that it didn't speak to me before Sangharakshita sort of started to see it as a symbol of the order. And but very much that sense, what the Dalai Lama says, that his religion is love. And certainly in Triratna, the Bodhisattva ideal, the ideal of trying to do whatever we can in whatever way we can to alleviate suffering in the world and exemplify. I very much like the fact that, you know, you're still out in the world, and I imagine you're Max out in the world. I had resigned from Macquarie University before I got ordained, so I'm not out in the world. In fact, I'm very aware that I live in a bubble, except of course for my beloved family, but they keep me, you know, a bit on the straight and narrow. Indeed. So yeah. So that's enough from us, and I think I've gone well over 8 minutes. So.